Thank you, Ann. And it goes without saying that as co-director along with Mike of the EELU program, I'm incredibly thankful for all the people that Mike and Ann mentioned, and to you for coming out to this fabulous event. So I think we can all agree that water is kind of important, right? Our state's lakes, rivers, streams, wetlands, and aquifers sustain us and other species and are of tremendous environmental and economic value. So our state's water quality policy and law is of vital importance as well, as is how federal law affects our state policy. Two recent examples being Supreme Court opinions, rulings governing the scope of wetlands protected by the Clean Water Act, and also the resolution of the ongoing dispute over the Memphis Aquifer between Mississippi and Tennessee. So on this theme, our State of Water panel is a veritable powerhouse of experience and expertise. And per the practice we've adopted, I'll briefly introduce them at the beginning in order of their opening discussions. Stephanie Durman is the Deputy General Counsel of the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. Dodd Galbreath is the Director of the Institute for Sustainable Practice at Lipscomb University and Chair of the Tennessee Board of Water Quality, Oil, and Gas. George Nolan is the Director of the Tennessee Office of the Southern Environmental Law Center. Grace Stranch is the CEO of the Harpeth Conservancy. And Scott Schoefernacker, sorry Scott, is the Science Director of Protect Our Aquifer, which focuses on the Memphis Aquifer. I've left to each panelist to tell us a bit more about themselves and their institutions. And I've also asked each speaker, as part of their opening discussion, to outline what they believe is the most pressing challenge for Tennessee water quality going forward. We'll hear from each panelist for about 5 to 7 minutes, open it up for some panel discussion and audience questions, and we have until 3 o'clock, 3 roughly, before the break. So Stephanie, please lead us off.
Good afternoon. Again, my name is Stephanie Durman, and I'm with the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. TDEC is our state environmental regulatory agency. As you heard on the earlier panel with Deputy Commissioner Tidwell, we also run Tennessee state parks. So we're a little bit like EPA and National Park Service combined into one agency, except we're better, much better. I currently serve as one of 2 Deputy General Counsel for TDEC, and I support the environmental regulatory side of the House, so notwithstanding what Greer said earlier, I'm not actually his attorney. I've practiced environmental law for almost 20 years. I've focused primarily on water law that whole time. I've also litigated under the Endangered Species Act and NEPA in my life prior to coming to TDEC. I've been with TDEC for about 8.5 years, and before that I worked for environmental NGOs in Boston and Knoxville. And in light of the prior panel, I will add, law is my second career. My first career was as an affordable housing developer in the Seattle area. So yes, I'm a recovering developer. So Tennessee faces a wide range of challenges when it comes to water, from flooding, which, as we've heard earlier, is a very localized issue, but in some areas, I assume you're all familiar with the Waverly flood last year. You know, there are some areas with very elevated flood risks. Flash droughts, I'd never heard of that before last year. I guess that's a thing. Emerging contaminants, and of course, potential loss of wetland protection. So I think the many challenges, though, can best be summarized as the urgent need to balance Tennessee's rapid population growth with protecting our shared water resources for future generations. And so I'm going to focus on one part of this challenge, which is water supply. We're truly fortunate to enjoy an abundance of water resources here in Tennessee. We're not the American West. We have large rivers such as the Holston and the Clinch, the Tennessee River, the Cumberland. Of course, we have the Mississippi River. We have the Mississippi Sands Aquifer. So we really are blessed with plenty of water overall. And that's the catch. While Tennessee as a whole has plenty of water, there are parts of the state where the water supply needs of a growing population poses a critical challenge moving forward. And TDEC has identified 3 priority watersheds across the state where there may be a bit of a mismatch between water availability and demand. The first is the Sequatchie River Basin. The second is the Old Hickory watershed on the Cumberland Plateau. And then, of course, the Duck River watershed. Since you're here in Nashville, and we talked about it earlier, you probably noticed there's a lot of growth and development. Crane City. For those of us lucky enough to get our water from the Cumberland River, we don't really need to worry about having enough, right? That's Big River, we should be fine. But moving further south from Nashville, communities in the Duck River watershed are also growing fast. This is partially because of the lack of housing affordability in the Nashville metro area, right? I mean, it's great that we are having a lot of housing built, but we're not really building enough affordable housing. But it's also a function of local economic development. So just as one example, the city of Columbia from 2010 to 2020 grew by about 20%. As of the end of 2021, it had projects on the books that would increase housing by 38%. That's a lot of potential growth. We heard a little bit about EV batteries. Of course, one economic driver in Middle Tennessee is automobile manufacturing, and EV is very important to our clean energy future. But building EV batteries is very water intensive. One estimate I saw was that for a single lithium ion battery, that's about 1,250 gallons of water. So a few years ago, TDEC began getting inquiries from a number of communities in the Duck River watershed that wanted either to build new withdrawals from the Duck River or to expand existing withdrawals. We noticed a trend. There seemed to be a lot trying to come out of one river. The Duck River is among the most biodiverse rivers in the country. It supports more than 50 species of mussels, more than 20 species of snails, 150 species of fish, including many threatened and endangered species. The Duck River is designated as a state scenic river, and it's also designated by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as critical habitat. So given the urgency of both addressing water supply needs and ensuring protection of this unique resource, TDEC initiated a pilot project to coordinate water withdrawal permitting in the watershed. We've been working with stakeholders on this project for several years. Some of them are at this table. And recently we issued draft permits and completed a public comment period. TDEC is currently evaluating comments, and as you might imagine, they run the gamut from don't issue the permits to don't you dare put limits on us during a drought. So therein lies the challenge. Again, we need to strike the right balance. And in this situation, TDEC has a little bit of a dual role because, on the one hand, it's absolutely our job to protect water resources from harm. And impacts of excess withdrawals could well be defined as pollution under the Water Quality Control Act. There's a very broad definition. But it's also our job as the agency implementing the Safe Drinking Water Act in Tennessee to help ensure that our local communities and our utilities are able to have access to reliable, clean drinking water. So we're working hard to find that balance in the Duck River, and as we move forward to some of these other watersheds, again, where there may be a little bit of a mismatch. So thank you, and I look forward to hearing from the other panelists.
Thank you, Stephanie. I really enjoy working with Stephanie in my role as the chair of the State Water Board, Water Quality Board of Oil and Gas. She is a true professional, and recently she was working directly with the board, and then she got dispatched to work more with the department, so now I feel like I've lost my best asset in that role. Okay, I'm very encouraged by this conference. Mike and Ann's leadership in putting this together, Linda Bregan's role in working on these issues, and your attendance here today, and the quality of the actions and the proposals that we've heard from today, I think are some of the best of my professional career. I feel like we're in a really good place to do some very important things and very impactful things. But I want to start with something that I would have expected a lawyer to read, and since I'm not a lawyer, I'm a citizen. Since we are a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, I thought this statement might be good to read. And it was read to me by a new commissioner on his first day of the job. He said, recognizing that the waters of Tennessee are the property of the state and are held in the public trust for the use of the people of the state, it is declared to be the public policy of Tennessee that the people of Tennessee, as beneficiaries of this trust, have a right to unpolluted waters. In the exercise of this public trust over the waters of the state, the government of Tennessee has an obligation to take all prudent steps to secure, protect, and preserve this right. It's pretty powerful language, pretty amazing language. But it really stems from who we are as Tennesseans and what Tennessee possesses. All of you know we have these enormously diverse ecosystems across our state. We have globally important national hotspots for biodiversity like the Clinch and Powell rivers. The Duck River alone has 500 species of aquatic plants, 50 species of mussels, and 151 species of fish. The Conservancy River has anywhere from 90 to 78 fish species and from anywhere from 25 to 18 mussel species, depending on what Google source you look at. We're very blessed with some really amazing resources. And outside of a lot of impoundments that were done on the Tennessee River and the Cumberland River, we have a lot of natural aquatic systems. Of course, outside a little bit of river channelization in West Tennessee, we still have some pretty natural rivers. The Wolf River, the Hatchie River, at least pieces of them are still intact. Part of what I wanted to do today was also to kind of talk about what I've observed over my career. I've been working 41 years in environmental work, and I feel a little bit like Forrest Gump. I got to witness some really fascinating things, so I'm going to touch on some of those. But the first thing I want to remind you of is what I often remind my students of, and that's how we all got into this business. And a lot of this happened before I was born. The Cuyahoga River caught on fire anywhere from 13 to 50 times between 1868 and 1969. It took us a long time to pass the Clean Water Act to deal with that, right? But fortunately, in 1968, Tennessee passed the Scenic Rivers Act first, which I'm told was the model for the federal Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, which was also passed in 1968. Tennessee passed its Tennessee Water Quality Act in 1971, and the Federal Clean Water Act was passed in 1972. So we've been leaders in this from the beginning, maybe because of our resources and maybe because of what we possess. A lot of my heroes were also Vanderbilt scholars and practitioners. Dr. Ed Thaxton, I understand, had a lot to do with writing that first Water Quality Act. Dr. Ruth Neff, who founded the Tennessee Environmental Council. I was blessed with filling her position when she retired in state government. Gary Myers, who authored and had a lot to do with the Tennessee North American Waterfowl Management Plan, used to tell us that the resource is why we do our jobs. He would always remind us it's all about the resource. Paul Estel Davis took us through the eras of the most polluted streams and the history of our state to a time when he and others stood by Mayor Bill Purcell on the banks of the Cumberland River and delisted the Cumberland River. So we've had a lot of success. Early in my life, I had a chance to work for the agency that was created after the Dust Bowl, which, as you know, was America's first big human-caused national environmental disaster. And my boss had me read pamphlets of nations for the first 3 days that I was this young 20-year-old intern that talked about civilizations that had lost their ability to survive because they didn't take care of their natural resources. And it had a huge impact on me. And so from there, as I began to work as a soil conservationist in 1983, I got to watch us go from draining wetlands to putting wetlands back on the landscape in a year's time. When I was working in Tipton County, Tennessee in 1987, I got to work on the first federal farm bill that stopped soil erosion in this country. It basically said if you drain a wetland or if you have soil erosion that's at intolerable rates, you can't get federal conservation benefits anymore. That was actually written by a congressman from Tennessee named Ed Jones. In the late 80s, I had a chance to work on coal mining reclamation in Fittress County. Tennessee was one of the few states that decided to give primacy back to the federal government. But because of some amazing leadership by at least 3 governors of Tennessee, coal mining in the state has largely been constrained to very limited areas. I had the opportunity to work on a master's thesis in the early 90s on wetlands conservation for the state, and I just happened to run into the task force chair in the hallway of Nolan Stadium. He asked me to come down to Nashville and give a couple of talks about it, and that's what got me my first job with Governor Ned Roy McWhorter, implementing the nation's 3rd wetland conservation plan that Tennessee fostered. Later on, when Governor Sundquist came into office, he decided to repeat updating that wetland conservation plan twice because of the quality of the wetlands we have in Tennessee. And Governor Sundquist decided to reformulate the old Obion Forked Deer Basin Authority that was actually channelizing rivers in West Tennessee and converted into a new authority called the West Tennessee River Basin Authority. Alan Lashes and I worked on some of that early reformulation language. And David Sawyers, the current commissioner of TDEC, was hired to start putting rivers back into their natural paths. This is an amazing series of successes and foresight that we've had. Now, I want to also mention, I'm going a little bit over my time, but Greer Tidwell Sr. pulled me aside one time and gave me the whole history of this West Tennessee tributaries background, and it really had a huge amount to do with the shaping of our policy under Republicans, because a Democrat had launched this initiative. Greer is here today in spite of the fact that his father passed away recently, and the funeral is going to be this week. So if you all would give Greer a big empathetic applause for being here today. His dad had a huge impact on my life and on this state. Under Governor Sundquist, I had a chance to work on the Interbasin Water Transfer Act of 2000, the Water Information Act of 2002. These were passed specifically to prevent Atlanta from taking water from the Tennessee River without our permission, and to also cause us to manage water movement across river basins in Tennessee among our own rivers in a more complete, more intelligent way. In 2009, Ann Davis or Carl Dean Warren appointed me to the Metro Stormwater Board. But, and I just wrapped up a 15-year term serving on that board, and now have the honor of serving for Governor Lee on the State Water Board. I'm not going to comment a lot about the State Water Board's activities or behaviors because my main goal there is to honor the peers who voted me in that position, so I don't want to get in front of my skis too far. And then secondly, I serve in a quasi-judicial role, so I have to be careful what I listen to and what I say. So I'm not going to say much about that. I will say this, the board has an enormous amount of untapped opportunity in statute to do great things in partnership with the department, and that's what I hope to do. And I do want to answer this last question of what I'm worried about most, and this is it. I'm worried about us keeping science at the forefront of all of our decisions. I'm worried about continuing to have creative leaders, but more importantly, catalysts for those leaders. I think we've heard from several of them today. And I'm also worried about continuing to have good environmental lawyers. I mean, my best bosses and my best partners in life have been environmental attorneys. So if you think back to the Civil War, which was one of our South's greatest challenges at stepping up to the plate and doing the right thing, you know, in a way, it took a Southerner to be forced to reckon with his own childhood and his own inner belief systems, agitated by a guy named Frederick Douglass to act and do the right thing. And I think history will serve us well if we continue to listen to those who are agitating us, who are asking us to move forward, and who are also trying to help us think more broadly about a greater vision that our state really deserves. And I'll leave you with these two thoughts. Life is a funny thing, and this is in the context of what I just mentioned. The song Dixie was written by a New Yorker. And I just saw this documentary this weekend. The government of Manhattan actually voted to pass a non-binding resolution to secede from the Union because the cotton trade was so valuable in the port of New York. So we don't all start off at the right place, but in Tennessee we end up at the right place.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm George Nolan, and I'm so grateful to be here. And I'm the director of the Tennessee office of the Southern Environmental Law Center. And SELC is a nonpartisan, nonprofit, public interest law firm and legal advocacy organization rooted in the South. And what that means is that we employ more than 100 lawyers who work in 9 offices in 6 southeastern states and Washington, D.C. And 7 of those lawyers, including me, staff our Tennessee office here in Nashville. And a big part of what we do is that we partner with great local organizations like the Harpeth Conservancy and Protect Our Aquifer and others. And we represent groups like that in court and administrative proceedings at no charge to them. And we think that model is important because conservation groups need to have access to lawyers and law firms and courts in order to enforce our environmental laws and push for better outcomes. Now, a lot of the work that I do is centered around protecting water. And when JB asked us to think about what the greatest challenges are to water protection in Tennessee, I would have to say that it is what I would call the breakneck pace of unbridled growth. Now, I'm not saying that growth is bad. It's not bad. We need a certain amount of growth. We need smart growth. But what I am saying that is as we grow, we have to protect the carrying capacity of our watersheds. I saw some statistics recently from the Boyd Center of Business and Economic Research about in-migration to Tennessee. And those showed that in 2022, Tennessee experienced net migration of more than 81,000 people. So what that means is they counted the people coming into our state, they subtracted the people that moved out of our state, and we had a net gain of more than 81,000 people in 1 year. That's off the charts. It's like nothing we've ever experienced. It's a 60% jump from 2021, where we had a net increase of more than 50,000 new Tennesseans. So we are in the midst of a demographic phenomenon that is unprecedented. People are moving from landscapes in other states that are already built out, and they're coming here in droves, and they're creating tremendous financial incentives for some developers to build out our pristine watersheds as quickly as possible. And we at SELC are finding that recently we're having to step in collaboration with some of our partners and act as a counterweight to requests by certain development interests to remove the legal guardrails that are designed to keep our watersheds healthy and safe. And I'll give an example of something that's happening right now. In our General Assembly, there's a a piece of legislation pending HB 1054, which is sponsored by a representative who happens to be a real estate developer. And it proposes to change our State Water Quality Control Act so that we will no longer have state-level protections for our wetlands. And now think about that. TDEC has estimated that if that legislation in its original form passes, it will remove all legal protections for more than 430,000 acres of wetlands in Tennessee. So if developers are allowed to fill and pave over those wetlands without any permitting requirements, any analysis, any thoughtful consideration of the impacts on neighbors or water quality or wildlife, then we will experience flooding and water quality degradation and species loss like we have not suffered before. So we're collaborating with some of our partners and working in great earnest to educate our members of the General Assembly about the implications of this bill that they're being asked to vote on. And one of the suggestions that we're making is that rather than kind of upend our wetlands protection system in Tennessee, it would be much better to rely on the board that Professor Galbreath chairs to promulgate rules that govern how we protect our wetlands, given that federal protections have been significantly decreased by our U.S. Supreme Court in a ruling last year called Sackett. So that's an example of the type of work we do. I'm so glad to be part of this interesting conversation, and I'll turn it over to my other panelists. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Grace Stranch. Like Greer, I am also a Nashville native, and I feel so thankful to be on this panel with so many people I respect and work with on a regular basis and a daily basis for some. I have Dory, our founder. We have longtime supporters, issue advocates, and tons of interns in here right now that have worked with Harpeth Conservancy. So I'm just really thrilled to get to be in the room with you today. I've been with Harpeth Conservancy for about 2 years, a little over 2 years now, and I have been CEO since April. Prior, I was a litigator. I did class action, complex litigation, and union representation. But I always had a passion for the environment, and I knew that I would probably end up in some larger environmental capacity. And I really fell in love with Harpeth Conservancy's vision: clean water and healthy ecosystems for rivers in Tennessee, championed by those who live here. And the systemic work that Harpeth Conservancy does is what really drew me to it, that we are focused on making systemic change, not just Band-Aids. And we do that through 3 different main avenues. We use sound science, responsible policy, and strong community engagement. So we are lucky we have a PhD scientist on staff who studied nutrient pollution. So he does modeling, we collect our own data, he analyzes other data. Right now, we're gonna be launching Tennessee's first predictive E. coli monitoring program that will have a wide variety of highly recreated sites throughout Middle Tennessee. And on our policy front, we're proactive and unfortunately often reactive with permits, rulemaking, legislation, all sorts of mechanics of systemic issues that might impact our rivers. And then community engagement, I think that is the core that brings everything together, is that we are working with all communities, strengthening our current partnerships and trying to expand so that all Tennesseans truly have a voice and they understand what's at stake and what they can do about it. And so before I talk about the issues, I think it's important to understand why our water quality matters. So many of you have heard these facts, but I'm gonna keep on saying them till you all have them memorized, you tell your best friends, you tell everyone you know. So Tennessee is a part of the 3rd most aquatically biodiverse hotspot in the world. I know you've already heard a little bit about the duck, but it is the most aquatically biodiverse river in all of North America. It's the third. We get around 60% of our drinking water from our rivers. And unfortunately, around 60% of our rivers do not meet federal water quality standards. We even have a global impact. We are responsible for around 10% of the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. Our water quality here really, truly matters. And so what we do to protect it doesn't just impact all of us as Tennesseans, but it has global consequences. So I always want to start that out. This is what really matters. And when George was talking, we were talking ahead of time a little bit about this, about growth, and I have to agree. I think growth is one of the largest issues for impacting our water and how growth is proceeding in our state. We have unfettered growth that is impacting Tennessee's resiliency. We're seeing increased extreme weather patterns and that are destroying, and we are currently destroying our natural protections, and we are undoing necessary regulations. George talked a little bit about HB 1054, and I want to touch on that as well. You know, this could gut protections from 55% of our wetlands. We have already lost 60% of our wetlands in Tennessee. This is going to impact flooding. We are already one of the most inland states that has flooding issues. This is only going to increase that. Our aquifer recharge, major issue, and then filtering out contaminants. You know, our wetlands filter out heavy leads, PFAS. So when we talk about emerging contaminants, we're going to have issues when we don't have these wetlands that are filtering out these PFAS. And how are we going to regulate this? We have all of these small utilities that don't have the infrastructure, and regulations are going to be coming down on these PFAS eventually. And so we have to be ready to act on them. And when you look at our demographics, around 93% of Tennessee is considered rural. And around 95% of those rural Tennesseans get their drinking waters from their well waters or natural springs. We did mapping at Harpeth Conservancy to see how do these isolated wetlands compare to well water areas. The whole map is just covered in dots. These wetlands, if we lose them, we will have impacts to people's drinking waters, whether it's contamination, whether it's drought in different areas, because wetlands don't just protect flooding, but they also help with drought for farmers pulling that water in. So this is a huge, huge potential impact for our water quality and for our river systems. And I also think that one of the other major problems that we have seen is that many communities don't have strong zoning ordinances. So when this growth happens, they don't have the necessary structures or infrastructure to handle it. And even the ones that do have good zoning structures don't always have updated data, so that their current ordinances aren't as effective because they're used for past data. They also often have inadequate stormwater protections or just general regulatory issues as a whole. And so as we're expanding out without having these systems in place, what we're going to see is more and more contamination to our water quality. And like Stephanie said earlier, you know, the infrastructure isn't there for all of these communities to begin with. And so they're trying to build it up, and there's not always adequate water in those areas to build that infrastructure. So it's a huge problem. I think it's really important to note too that water impacts so many other environmental elements. You're going to hear some more, but one thing that people don't realize is how much water impacts energy. And they said around 30 to 40% of municipal energy bills across the US, their consumption are directly related to the consumption from public drinking water and waste systems, with a contribution of 45 million tons of greenhouse gases annually. And that's from water. That's not having efficient systems. So I think we really have to be moving towards regionalization and looking at the effectiveness of our systems and saying, is this a smart area to grow? We work with tons of fantastic developers who are really invested in conservation and how they build and where they build and whether it makes sense. But we have to have more plans in place to protect those areas that don't have those developers who care about those issues, who maybe aren't from our community and they don't care as much about what they leave behind once they make their money. And I think, you know, we should be stewards of our environment for us and for future generations. And if we truly want a resilient Tennessee, we must have conservation-minded development as we grow. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Scott Schoefernacker. I am the Science Director for Protect Our Aquifer, and I appreciate Grace's comments and George, his comments, and working with them this year has been fantastic on the wetlands bill and driving to Nashville. I got a frog in my throat. Sorry. Driving to Nashville more times this year than I ever have since living here many, many years ago. So I'm a hydrogeologist, that's my background. I study groundwater. And I started out about 18 years ago working for an environmental consulting group, traveling around the United States, conducting environmental site assessments, and then moving into academia and becoming the Associate Director of Water Resources for the Center for Applied Earth Science and Engineering Research at the University of Memphis. And now my latest journey is into advocacy with Protect Our Aquifer. So it's been an interesting journey for the last 8 months, to say the least. We are a science-led advocacy group to protect, conserve, and preserve the Memphis Sand Aquifer. So for those who don't know, the Memphis Aquifer is a very extensive, large aquifer that underlies 8 states, portions of 8 states, from southern Illinois all the way down to Louisiana and Mississippi. And portions of the recharge zone for that aquifer is in West Tennessee. So if you're driving to Memphis and you hit Jackson, you're right at the edge of the recharge zone. And then as you drive further along all the way to the eastern boundary of Shelby County is where it becomes confined. So in between Jackson and East Shelby County is basically unconfined. So the sand is at or near the surface. So anything that goes in to the ground goes into the aquifer, contamination, water, whatever. So that's our recharge zone, and that area is primarily rural, right? You have farmland, forests, wetlands, streams and rivers, and all that water that goes into the ground either helps feed the rivers, that recharge enters and exits into the streams as base flow, or it goes into deep aquifer recharge, which feeds the water system where we got our water in Memphis, Tennessee. So as land use changes, and we've been talking about rapid development, we face rapid development in West Tennessee by Ford Motor Company coming in with Blue Oval. So Blue Oval will be the new Ford Lightning assembly plant, and they will bring in about 6,000 jobs. They're expecting 100,000 people to move into the West Tennessee area, which again requires associated services with development. So you're looking at new neighborhoods, you're looking at gas stations, dry cleaners, strip malls, new schools. So all that means is that for us, it's potential sources of contamination, and you're dealing with impermeable surfaces. And with impermeable surfaces, you push more water into the streams out of the system instead of allowing that water to soak in. Now, not everywhere the water doesn't go straight into the aquifer system. There's points that allows for rapid recharge. So in some areas, like the uplands, you're looking at water taking 100 years to reach the aquifer, while you go into this upland dry streams and you're looking at seasonal recharge. So those are the areas you kind of want to look to protect. Let's see, what else do I need to talk about? So issues with water quality that I see, and I agree the emerging contaminants with PFAS will be a big one. I know that they are currently sampling all the inputs and production wells, and hopefully we won't find any in the Memphis Aquifer, but there could be some. The increase in development, as I said, and the increase for potential contaminant sources is one big issue for water quality, as well as water quantity. How much is getting into the system? We know how much is getting out by we monitor how much we produce, the public water supply industry and such. However, we don't know how much is getting in. All we can tell is that the levels stay about the same. They may go down, they may go up, but as long as they stay about the same, we call it good. and the lack of infrastructure. So West Tennessee, small towns, you have water supply. They have their own production wells, and you have wastewater treatment. However, go outside of towns, all you have to do is put your own well in, and then you have your septic. So how do we accommodate for 100,000 more people in West Tennessee? And where is that wastewater going to go? And then as well, another issue is the lack of monitoring. We don't have a very good groundwater monitoring network at all in the state of Tennessee. We have only a handful of continuous monitoring around Memphis and Shelby County, and that's where our main production comes from. We pump 180 million gallons of water a day. So expand that out to add another city size of Jackson and West Tennessee and other industries that'll be coming in. That'll create a big issue. So again, how do we keep up with development? How do we keep up with the monitoring so we can understand what's happening to our groundwater resources in West Tennessee? So, thank you.
Thanks, what a wonderful panel. You know, one of the goals of this conference, and truly Ann is the designer behind it, is to bring together panels of experts on different themes, conservation, water, energy, to demonstrate that these themes are highly interrelated and that you really have to hear like panel after panel to start to get, wow, you know, we've got development, conservation, water issues, and we're going to hear about energy issues after the break. So it's truly interrelated. That does make it tough. There are just no easy answers. I mean, as Stephanie pointed out, her agency is protecting drinking water for new entrants to the state, but also protecting water resources. The last theme I think you'll see over both those panels, and certainly the third panel, science-led. I heard science-led stressed many times. You saw, you know, the fabulous mapping that the Land Trust is doing. That's science-based decision-making. We've got about 10, 15 minutes. I certainly have plenty of questions for the panel, but I'd want to open it up first to the floor and the audience with any questions you might have. Yes, sir.
One of the elements in the room that has not been discussed by either panel, as you can tell, is the effects of climate change on the earth. And it's going to upend things in unpredictable ways. It's also going to accelerate and increase exponentially. And with regard to water use, we're going to see increasing bouts of drought that will become worse than we've seen for longer periods of time, followed by periods of deluge. So to any one of the panelists here, what are your plans to incorporate that, and how are you doing it?
I'd be happy to jump in on that. We're doing a lot of work in the Duck River watershed around the issue of maintaining an adequate amount of water in that wonderful biologically diverse river so that human water consumption doesn't cause the ecosystem to collapse. And in fact, my colleague Stephanie Biggs, who's I think one of JB's former students, has been spearheading the effort to provide TDEC with information as it engages in a permitting process whereby 8 water utilities that suck water out of the river for human consumption are asking to increase the amount of water that people take from the river. So to put it in perspective, currently the 8 utilities along the Duck River that stretch from Manchester all the way over to Centerville, Tennessee, are allowed to take up to 54 million gallons of water a day from the river. And the proposal is to increase that amount to 73 million gallons a day collectively, which is a 35% increase in human water consumption. Now, climate change is going to affect how that river, whether that river stays safe in the future. I mean, we're in the midst of a drought. It started this fall. Back in 2007, there was a severe drought in the Duck River watershed, and many organizations like the Nature Conservancy and others kind of hit the panic button in 2007 and 2008 because the river got really close to having the most biodiverse ecosystem, aquatic ecosystem in North America collapse. So what we are suggesting is that as TDEC permits water consumption from the river, and as water utilities make plans about how much water they're going to take from the river and how they use it, they need to think about the fact that droughts are predicted to be more severe in the future. And we need to implement policy solutions like water conservation and pricing structures that incentivize water conservation and incentivize utilities to fix leaking pipes and to consider solutions like going to a bigger river like the Tennessee or the Cumberland River for human water consumption needs. So I think your question's a great one. I think that drought needs to inform, and climate change needs to inform a lot of our state level permitting decisions going forward.
Yeah, and we're also working on that issue with George separately. I would say that most of our work, when you're working on resiliency issues, you're working on climate change. So the wetlands, a lot of our talking points are directly related to flooding we're seeing increasing without having those wetlands with that sticky soil that's holding on to it. What's going to happen is you're going to flood your neighbor's house. You're going to flood downstream. You're going to have more drought. And so a lot of our additional work is why we focus a lot on these zoning ordinances and trying to get communities up to speed so that they have good ordinances in place that can handle some of these extreme climate changes, and that we're trying to work with communities, say, are you using FEMA? What programs are you in? So we are trying to build up these communities, and we're fiscal sponsors for a few different groups to try to empower and build them up so that they can focus and support their local rivers on ordinances, on protecting wetlands, on the Duck River, biodiversity protection and flow rates. But all of that goes directly towards climate change. And, depending on the community we're talking with, depends on the talking points. But I think that having that infrastructure talks and those policy talks and maybe, changing permit levels on certain things as a result of climate change are all built within our programs at Harpeth Conservancy.
I just want to touch on one thing that, the word resilience has been mentioned, and, resilience is essentially equivalent to a shock absorber for climate change, for the droughts and for the floods. If you look at what New York State did years ago to try to reassess, their drinking water infrastructure planning and their fiscal assessment of what the cost would be with that, they put all their money into forested watersheds and planting more trees in the upper watersheds of their receiving waters. They found out that was more cost effective than spending more money on the drinking water technology down at the bottom of the hill. And then secondly, the whole reason Governor Recorder and Governor Sundquist, two governors of two different parties, decided to stop channelizing rivers in West Tennessee was because we needed the shock absorbers of those floodplains to fully operate, not to be levied off, to allow the flood, to allow groundwater to be infiltrated across the landscape. And in urban areas, that means our steepest forested slopes have got to stay forested because they're infiltrating water that eventually will make its way down into a stream during a drought. We've got to have our floodplains and our riparian areas. Nashville is routinely cited as a leader in this by the New York Times. When we had the big flood over in Waverly, they were talking about all the buyouts that the city of Nashville did. So we have all these elements of success politically, and human will has got to step up and act on it.
I'll just briefly add that TDEC does require all of our public water suppliers to have drought management plans and to update those plans as needed over time. The utilities, though, say, well, we need more water when there's a drought because people have to water their lawns. So I think some of this might need to be a little bit of a cultural change in how we think about water, that it's not an unlimited resource even here in Tennessee where it is raining today. You mentioned flooding as well, and we're certainly concerned about flashiness of flooding, but, TDEC has limited to no regulatory authority with respect to flood protection. You know, flood protection is one of the resource values that we look at in permitting for impacts to streams and wetlands, but that's about the extent of our authority. And then, you know, on the flip side, you know, a lot of our like our analysis of what an appropriate effluent limitation might be, or our analysis of what required stormwater controls might be, are based on historic data. And I think there is going to come a time where we need to recognize that the historic data isn't necessarily telling us what's going to happen in the future. Now, one thing, just structurally, you know, because under this is a derivation from the Clean Water Act, but our permits are for 5-year terms. So our permits do allow us the opportunity every 5 years to revisit the analysis that they were based on. And so when we do that, we need to be looking at, you know, the best real-time data that we have.
Okay, one more question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, in your response to the House Bill 599 that Jason Powell has suggested last year, which is to create a mesonet so that there's coordinated and rainwater records kept at a place in each of the counties, which would allow people to understand where the water flowing is going to be greatest and so forth in a coordinated way all over the state of Tennessee. Do you think that's going to happen? Do you think it would be useful?
I'll just say in general, data collection supports science. Science supports understanding of the data. The whole reason we passed the Water Information Act was that we realized that states defend themselves well in Supreme Court cases over interstate water fights when they have records associated with water quality, water quantity, and can project forward their future demand in conjunction with what other states may be seeing that they're going to need. So data is a great solution. It requires a little more government to manage it, and that's one of those culture changes that I think was alluded to earlier, is that, you know, government does good things for us. They build highways, they give us a Department of Defense. Government's not all bad, and that's the part that I feel like we need to talk more about, you know, with our public leaders. When you talk to local landowners, they know these problems exist practically and fundamentally. They're just kind of caught up in the ideology and the rhetoric, and getting back to basic conversations and collaboration is going to help us move forward.
And I think whether these kinds of bills pass a lot of times are the fiscal notes and what we're willing to put our money towards as a state. And I think in the past, that hasn't always gone towards conservation or the things that always benefit the public. You know, I'm always saying, let's give TDEC more money. Let's give them more staff. Let's stop chipping away at their authority. You know, let's put more money into data collection, science that can truly inform the decisions that we're making. And I didn't touch on this earlier, and I just wanted to bring this up because I think it's really important, that we are 6th in the nation for water affordability concerns, and there are real equity issues around people being able to afford our water. And so I just want to make sure I touched on that because I think it's really important that in a lot of these communities where the growth is happening, there are not the financial backing to support that. And so we have to look as a society, as Tennesseans, are we going to take care of each other and make sure that we can have affordable drinking water? Are we putting money towards science? Or where are we putting our funds? And I think that comes down to all of us and our voices and reaching out to our constituents or the people who represent us and say, hey, I really want you to back this bill. I want you to ask for money in the budget for this. I want you to support TDEC. You know, we had that opportunity during those 5-year permits to say, hey, we want stricter nutrient pollutions on this one. We want these other things in these bills. And Stephanie hears from us quite often on the things that we would love to have in those permits. But if you take nothing away from this, but that is that you have a real voice, and if we really want to have our budgets really influence our values, then we have to push for them, and we can't stay silent, and we need to be, you know, working with organizations, funding organizations who are doing the science background, and working together. And so that's why I love that we're having this and bringing people together. It just warms my heart.
Well, with that,
Yeah.
I don't think we have time for more questions, but please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists.